Good morning and welcome back to Rising. The big day is here. It is debate night, which means a very long day of work for you and I. I see we totally unplanned have done a red state, blue state fashion combo today. Always makes me happy when that happens.
Yeah, just throwing people off with where we stand. But
right.
We got the memo.
Right, although you live in a blue state, a red state rather, and I live in Washington, D.C., which isn't a state, but it would be the bluest one ever if it was. So maybe we're matching our regional, we're wearing our regional colors.
Yeah, we are, our home teams.
All right, let's get to it. Well, some big news. Polling guru Nate Silver is predicting that former President Trump has a 66% chance of winning the presidential election. Silver, the founder of 538, cited several likely reasons for Biden's potential loss, including Biden's low approval rating, the economy, saying the average Americans have struggled to see enough gains in their paychecks to keep up with inflation. There's, of course, immigration, and there's the war in Gaza. Silver also says that Biden looks stronger in the popular vote than in the Electoral College, which is interesting.
Silver was already sounding the alarm back in February. At the time, he tweeted, quote, "You don't demonstrate your seriousness, that Trump is an existential threat to democracy by going through the motions to renominate an 81-year-old with a 38% approval rating, who 75% of voters think is too old, without giving anyone a choice, because that's just how things are done. And if Trump were to win, it wouldn't be because corporate America supports him." Take a listen to Chief Executive Leadership Institute CEO Jeffrey Sonnenfeld.
We've been pointing out that there are no Fortune 500 CEOs who are supporting former President Trump. And that is a historic break going back to William Howard Taft and through Calvin Coolidge and Ronald Reagan and the Bushes and everything, is that it's been anywhere from 40 to 60% public and financial support. It's zero now, and it was zero in 2016. And the Trump economic package frightens them. It's extremely inflationary. The tariffs, 10% across the board on all imports, that's just crazy. It leads to a 3% increase for sure in inflation and plunging the GDP. Right. And that's before retaliatory gestures. The increase in the deficit, he wants to cut $5 trillion of taxes with no commensurate cut in expenditures. So these are problems. He doesn't believe in the independence
but
of the Fed.
What do you say to the CEOs? There's a lot of CEOs who are watching us now, probably watching you speaking, saying, but you know what? I don't like the Biden administration when it comes to the regulatory regime right now. I worry about the tax policy and what's going to happen if the Trump taxes roll off in 2025 and what that debate looks like. I mean, there are folks, as you said, 70% of the CEO community, Republicans. Do they turn out to be reluctant Biden voters? Do they not vote at all? I mean, where do you think they land?
They'll be reluctant Biden voters.
Fox News' Jimmy Fallon fired back at the viral video, tweeting, quote, "Hilarious to watch Dems go from claiming to be the party of the little people to bragging that all the CEOs who are the richest endorse them. Meanwhile, the nation is bracing for a high-stakes Supreme Court ruling regarding Donald Trump and presidential immunity. At the heart of this decision will be the extent presidential immunity can shield a former president from conduct during their time in office. The ruling could signal whether it's possible for special counsel Jack Smith to prosecute Trump on federal charges, or whether he's freed from standing trial related to crimes he allegedly committed while he was in office." So I want to go back to Nate Silver.
Yeah.
I love digging into the empirical research, the statistical analysis that Nate Silver does around polling is highly respected, well-read. When he was at 538, he was the go-to for a lot of people. This model, I looked into the methodology because it's shocking, 66%.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to know where he's getting it from. And I'm not confident, as someone who's used statistical models with political data before to do predictive work, that this model is robust. He goes on to say in his post that we think our model did a good job in 2016. Mm-hmm. This was a model that predicted Trump had a chance of winning of 30% on Election Day. And this model, many people are pointing out, well, it's not the same model, but if you read his methodology papers, he says, well, the 2020 model, we made some changes to adjust for COVID, but other than that, it's essentially the 2016 model. And here he's saying the 2024 model only has the COVID changes taken out. So that means, essentially, the 2024 model is the 2016 model that predicted horribly.
Well, I mean, but that's the issue with statistics, right? It's not, if you say something has a 30% chance of happening, that doesn't mean it's impossible to happen. That means if you flipped a coin 10 times, 3 of the times you would get that result, right? So I think people have a hard time when they say, like, even with this, Trump has a 66% chance of winning. That doesn't mean he's guaranteed to winning. That means slightly more than half the time, if he could run this experiment a bunch of times, he would be winning. It doesn't mean the other outcome is impossible. It just means it's slightly more likely to do it this way. And I think that's probably accurate of Trump's win in 2016, where it was slightly more unlikely. And now, of course, a lot of the issue was the pronouncements of the pundit class was actually far beyond what the polls were suggesting and what the predictions were saying. The polls were suggesting that it was very close at the end, and it could really go either way. And people were because people couldn't conceive of Trump winning. The pundit class was confidently predicting a Hillary victory, and that's why it looked like, oh, everybody was wrong, everybody missed this. Even though by the end, if you were looking at the data, it was like, oh, this is getting pretty close. In 2020. You had a similar thing where I think the polls were slightly overstating Biden's likelihood of winning. For instance, a lot of the polls had Biden winning Florida, which he ended up losing. So Trump he overperformed a little bit of the fundamentals while still losing. So the question here is, has there been too much correction in the other direction, where they're giving Trump more of a chance than he actually has? I don't think that's the case. My gut feeling is that this is pretty close, and Trump, as of this moment in time, is slightly favored to win. I don't know if I'd put it at 66%. I would put it above 50% for sure.
I think my issue with it is Nate Silver's extensive work does not demonstrate that backtesting the model with the existing data to predict elections in the past. There's no description of what that looks like. So we have no idea if this model is accurate at all. And it feels like a lot of work to put into a model that I think most people could say, like, yeah, Trump's probably more likely to win. Like, how much is it worth it for Nate Silver to put this amount of effort into developing a model that seemingly isn't that predictive? I think it's a waste of a lot of resources, and it's such a horse race. We only do the election one time. We've only had, however, 45 presidential elections in the history of the country, so it's hard to statistically model it. But what he's looking at is, the swing states, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, all states that Biden won last time that helped solidify his victory over Trump. Those are all looking like Trump pickups right now. And then it comes down to, again, the 2016 states that flipped the election for Trump: Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Trump won the election versus Hillary because he won those 3 states when Hillary was expected to win. So if Biden can still hold on to those states, even as Trump picks up Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, then it will be. I think then the numbers are like 270 to 268 by the narrowest possible conceivable margin. Biden would be reelected. However, he could have problems in Michigan because of the Arab American vote. He could have problems in Pennsylvania because Trump is really trying with labor, with the white working class. And then if anything else goes wrong anywhere on the board, if Biden suffers an unexpected loss anywhere else, his goose is cooked. So that's why things are in Trump's direction. Biden's not out of it because those polls in the Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin corridor are still pretty neck and neck there. And, inflation's gotten a little bit better. It seems, according to Nate Silver, that Trump's gotten a little sliver of damage to his support because of the trial conviction. Again, it's very slight, but we're talking about a small number of voters in these swing states that are going to end up deciding things. So it's interesting. We should note the point about the CEOs. Yes, the richest people in the country have a lot of contempt for Donald Trump. That is very obvious.
Now, Trump is trying to make overtures to the business community right now. He obviously had that very successful meeting with the elite business roundtable, where he talked about having a better regulatory environment, doing tax cuts. It was interesting to hear that guy go, slamming Trump for tariffs. Biden has just implemented by executive fiat really aggressive tariffs. Frankly, both candidates are in favor of tariffs that I find ruinous to the economic situation of our country and that are opposed by a lot of business people. But I don't know that it's the case that I think business people are certainly not as against Trump as they were previously.
I couldn't disagree more. I think CEOs are afraid to make a statement in public about something like this, and I think that's what they're avoiding. They see the kind of backlash that a lot of big companies get when they pick sides politically, and I think most CEOs love Donald Trump because thanks to his corporate profits tax cuts and his rolling back of regulations, they've seen their profits increase from around $2 trillion annually to around $3 trillion on an annual basis. So an increase of 50%. That's very significant. Yeah. We saw that happen during Trump's administration. He brags that it's thanks to his policies. So they might not want to say, like, yes, the CEO of X company endorses Trump,
right.
and then people boycott.
They like his policies. They can't say they support him.
Exactly, but he's very good for big business,
circles.
And I would say rich people in the country actually quite like Donald Trump.
Yeah. All right, we'll have more Rising right after this. Well, it's been 4 years since the last debate between Biden and Trump, one that was met with much anticipation. Now, before we watch tonight, we thought we'd look back at some interesting moments from the past debates, see what the candidates had said, and what's happened since then. To start with, while abortion is now one of the top issues for today's voters, Roe v. Wade was only mentioned once during the 2020 debate. As a reminder, this was shortly after Justice Amy Coney Barrett was nominated. Let's watch.
The president also is opposed to Roe v. Wade. That's on the ballot as well in the court. And so that's also at stake right now. And so the election is all
You don't know it's
begun.
on the ballot. Why is it on the ballot?
Because
why is it on the ballot? It's not on the ballot.
It's on the ballot in the court.
I don't think so.
In the court.
Well, there's nothing happening there.
Donald, would you just
you don't know her view on Roe v. Wade.
I don't know
her view.
Well, all right.
Trump was also planting the seed for election integrity issues.
I'm urging my supporters to go into the polls and watch very carefully because that's what has to happen. I am urging them to do it. But I hope it's going to be a fair election. If it's a fair election, I am 100% on board. But if I see tens of thousands of ballots being manipulated, I can't go along with that.
Meanwhile, nobody was talking about inflation. Instead, COVID was a top issue.
40,000 people a day are contracting COVID. In addition to that, about between 750 and 1,000 people a day are dying. When he was presented with that number, he said, it is what it is. Well, it is what it is because you are who you are. He knew all the way back in February how serious this crisis was. He knew it was a deadly disease.
Trump did go after President Biden on Hunter Biden's laptop. Here's a clip from their second debate.
So don't give me the stuff about how you're this innocent baby. Joe, they're calling you a corrupt politician.
Nobody.
President Trump, I want to stay on the issue of race. We're talking about the issue.
Laptop from hell.
President Trump, we're talking about race right now, and I do want to stay on the issue of race. President Trump,
I have to respond to that.
Please,
because look,
very quickly.
There are 50 former national intelligence folks who said that what he's accusing me of is a Russian plant. They have said that this has all the 5 former heads of the CIA, both parties, say what he's saying is a bunch of garbage. Nobody believes it except his and his good friend Rudy Giuliani.
You mean the laptop is now another Russia hoax?
That's exactly what.
Is this where you're going? This is where he's going. The laptop is Russia.
Gentlemen, I want to stay on the issue of race.
You have to be kidding. Here we go again with Russia.
We're going to continue on the issue of race. Mr. President.
They did talk some more about Russia, but only in regards to allegations of election interference, not its relationship with Ukraine. Climate change, racism, and immigration were also issues that they discussed in those debates in 2020.
So I've resurfaced that clip a couple times of the Hunter Biden laptop discussion. I did a radar on it. I think it's pretty entertaining to look back at it now, everything President Biden said there is just wrong, and Trump's exasperation that what are you trying to make this a Russia thing again is dead on. This was shortly after the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story, which was described by many in the media and then by 50 top intelligence officials, including Dana Bash's ex-husband, as bearing all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Politico then had a headline saying, laptop is Russian disinformation, experts say. We now know years later that there's no evidence whatsoever that it was Russian tampered with, that it was a hoax by Russia, that the information on it is anything but genuine. In fact, the information on it has been used in Hunter Biden's trial to help convict him on the gun-related issues. But it was totally discounted on the basis of, well, experts, intelligence officials said it was this way, so it must be so. There's so much fact-checking in these debates. There's so many mainstream media figures falling over themselves to correct Trump and say that's not true, that's not lies. So I thought it was worth bringing up a clear, unequivocal time. President Biden asserted something that has now been shown to not be true, and we've just kind of memory hold that.
I think that the one thing that I will give Biden credit for is the laptop did not have concrete evidence that he was colluding with Hunter Biden in regard to his positions abroad. But I will say, it was very shocking because it was the first real time in history we saw the CIA collude with the president to push their agenda. So,
that's a little bit of facetiousness from
yes, this happens every administration since Eisenhower. But I think with these, debates reflecting back and thinking about Trump saying, well, Roe v. Wade is not on the ballot. It's interesting because Ketanji Brown Jackson voted the way she did in the Dobbs Jackson decision. And so you have that ruling, and Trump was kind of right there because they had the majority that they needed. They had the justices they needed on the court to overturn that case. So was it on the ballot? Did Biden do much to really address the aftermath of the overturning of Roe v. Wade?
Yeah,
Many people say no.
The seeds of Roe being overturned were very much already sown by then. And this has become a liability for Republicans at this point to some degree, although, Trump has consistently said, and others who are seeking the presidency said, some of them on the Republican side, that there ought to be no national abortion policy, and the states are going to do what they're going to do. They're allowed to do that now under Roe, and a very vigorous pro-life position, a very restrictionist policy on abortion has not won yet, in fact, even in very red states, and so that's that. There was a loss at the Supreme Court level recently for that attempt to prohibit in some fashion that anti-abortion drug that we all have so much trouble pronouncing. That was defeated 8-1, I think. So the Supreme Court is not a monolith. As much as Democrats complain that it's 6 ostensible conservative Republican justices now and 3 liberal progressives. There's still a lot of 9-0 decisions, 8-1 decisions, 7-2 decisions. I was just looking over today. There was a bunch of more cases where there was 2 cases that just came out that I haven't had time to quite look at the details yet, where the majority opinion is authored by Neil Gorsuch, who's one of the conservatives, and then the dissents in both cases are written by other conservatives, by Amy Coney Barrett in one case, Ohio v. the EPA, and Kavanaugh in the Purdue Pharma case. So they're definitely they're absolutely not a monolith. There is some difference of opinion significantly among the justices. And I was sorry to see, yesterday we talked about the social media case, Murthy v. Missouri, and I was disappointed that it was a 6-3 decision against my position, with Barrett and Kavanaugh and Roberts and the liberals on one side, and Gorsuch, Thomas, Alito on the other. So, yeah.
I think it's interesting the way we talk about Supreme Court justices now. Instead of saying, oh, they're an originalist or they're not an originalist, now we just straight up say liberal, conservative. Well, a lot has changed politically. Also, since 2020. we've had the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I mean, looking back on that debate, hearing how they're talking about Russia, hearing how they're talking about COVID, not talking about inflation, it's just very fascinating to think about how much the political landscape has really changed since those debates. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, the inflation crisis, Trump's convictions, Hunter Biden's convictions. There's been a lot that's gone on, and now after reflecting on it, more interested to see what tonight is like, because we get to relitigate all of that stuff.
Much has changed, although some things are just the same, including that the candidates are Joe Biden and Donald Trump, a straight-up rematch, something we've not had in this country on the presidential front in a very long time. I'm trying to think. It's a fun presidential trivia question. What was the last time there was a exact rematch of the previous two presidential candidates? It's probably Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson in the 50s, I think. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that, but I think that's the last time it was the same exact two candidates twice in a row. We'll have to double check that.
That's interesting. We're gonna have to check on that.
More Rising right after this.
Things just keep looking worse and worse for Boeing. A former Boeing consultant is one of the Justice Department's officials who will determine whether the aircraft manufacturing giant will face criminal charges following plane crashes and a slew of safety concerns that have come to light this year. Lisa Monaco, the United States Deputy Attorney General, had Boeing as a client when she worked at West Executive Advisors, a consulting firm co-founded by Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
In 2021, when she was being appointed to her current position, she reported owning between 1,000 and 15,000 of Boeing stock. She reported the same in 2022, according to new reporting in The Lever. Now, Boeing saw even more criticism come its way today. A Boeing executive gave new details about how the 737 MAX plane lost a panel in January. He said the plane left the ground without 4 critical bolts that secured the panel, also known as a door plug. But the National Transportation Safety Board is sanctioning Boeing for disclosing the non-public details. The board says that Boeing has blatantly violated the agency's rules by providing information about what happened to the public during the ongoing investigation. Here now to discuss all of this is Lever reporter Freddie Brewster. Welcome to Rising.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so tell us about this seemingly obvious conflict of interest involved in the official looking into this.
Yeah, so Lisa Monaco, like you guys stated in the opening there, she used to work at West Executive Advisors, the consulting firm co-founded by Antony Blinken, and she's the second in charge of the Justice Department right now. But she's not the only person there that also has worked in the corporate world. There's also Nicole Argentieri, who she had some pretty good prosecutorial bona fides when she was a federal prosecutor pursuing the mob in New York. But then she went on to work at O'Melveny and Myers, which is a law firm that boasts that it has dozens of former employees in high levels at the government. There's also Glenn Leon, who's the chief of the Justice Department's Criminal Fraud Division, and he used to work at as a compliance officer for Hewlett Packard. So it's an interesting revolving door between the corporate world and the governmental world. And then also, too, before I forget, Brett Geary, he's a former Justice Department employee, but he's now Boeing's chief legal officer.
Now, we had Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles as darlings of the Eisenhower administration at the height of U.S. covert operations and proxy wars during the Cold War. Of course, Alan Dulles being the head of intelligence and John Foster Dulles being Secretary of State, both of whom were lawyers, corporate lawyers, at Sullivan and Cromwell, where they had multinational corporations as clients, including United Fruit Company. And under their administration, the United States government, through covert operations, decided to orchestrate a coup in Guatemala when the elected leader decided to pursue economic initiatives that would really hurt United Fruit Company's ability to exploit the land and labor there in Guatemala. And we're told that that was a terrible administration, times of the past. We don't have things like that going on now. And I think some people see these connections and they're like, oh, well, powerful people will always end up in similar places and working together. Can you speak to more how Lisa Monaco's history could influence her decision now, because maybe she might find herself in the private world again after leaving her post?
Yeah, so aside from like an uptick in action from the antitrust division, corporate prosecutions under Merrick Garland and Monaco have been rather sluggish. Lately, the Justice Department has had a record of handing down agreements that have been favorable to companies accused of misconduct. The record's a little complex, and we detail this out in the story, but in 5 out of 7 major fraud cases resolved in the past year, and in all cases involving U.S.-based companies, the Justice Department has offered deferred prosecution agreements. So, this just kind of highlights how the revolving door between the government and the corporate world, allows for favorable prosecution agreements for these companies.
So what is next?
And then Robby, too, there's an issue that Reason Magazine's reported on quite a bit, and that's been about how, federal prosecutors will just pack on charges for, average citizens. And then, the flip side of that is that these corporations get some, appearingly sweetheart deals.
Yeah. So what is next? Thank you for noting that. What is next in in trying to hold this company actually accountable?
Yeah, they have until July 7th to bring official charges. There hasn't been, any word as to yet about how the Justice Department is going to go, but they have, just about a week to finalize this.
There's been a lot of attention to the treatment of whistleblowers by Boeing. There was kind of a firestorm following the congressional hearings surrounding this. But it seems to me that Congress is not the body that will ultimately take action that will result in any kind of recourse for Boeing. It sounds like it's going to have to come from the DOJ. And while we've seen a lot of action in the antitrust division on some fronts, it seems that their silence on this is a deliberate exemplification of their bias here. And you spoke to favorability, sort of having this favoritism of Boeing. It seems to me that this exchange of favors has a monetary value to Boeing. And so I'm curious if you think in potentially the next administration, if it's not Biden, there will be any kind of legal recourse for people like Lisa Monaco. Have you heard any rumblings of people pursuing, criminal prosecution for this exchange of favors?
I've not heard of any sort of criminal prosecution for that. But this is unfortunately the way the government has operated, as of lately. And who knows? Like, there could be some change to that, but we'll just have to wait and see.
I'm curious also, Freddie, how did you get a lead on this story? I haven't heard this outside of the reporting by The Lever. The Lever's always covering really good stories, investigative reporting I don't see elsewhere. I'm curious where this lead came from.
I mean, you just looked right into Lisa Monaco's history of her working at West Execs. I mean, it's just right there. I think The Intercept had previously reported on her doing consulting work for Boeing in 2021. They did kind of like a big profile of West Exec Advisors, the consulting firm. And, we just kind of like built off of that.
What do you make of these whistleblowers who have, it's not funny at all, literally dying under mysterious circumstances where, the evidence, I don't want to be conspiratorial, the evidence has clearly indicated natural causes or suicide, but it just seems so damning and so suspicious given the things they were going to say about Boeing, before in front of investigators.
Yeah, haven't done any reporting on the whistleblower deaths. But, an interesting thing with the Justice Department as it relates to whistleblowers is that in March 2023, they issued a memo on corporate compliance programs saying that prosecutors should consider the adequacy and effectiveness of the compliance program at the time of the offense as well at the time of the charging decision. Well, was it just last week, Boeing's CEO, David Calhoun, admitted during a Senate testimony hearing that whistleblowers have been retaliated against. And so it doesn't really seem like, Boeing has been, has a strong, fruitful compliance program in place. And then also previously we reported, I reported earlier this year that, there's been more than 1,800 service difficulty reports, which are essentially like federal safety reports that airlines have to issue regarding Boeing's 737 MAX program. So there's, long-running issues with the 730 MAX program in particular.
I'm trying to get Robby one over on this, but I like to frequently reference Benito Mussolini's quote that fascism is the merging together of the corporations and the state and would more effectively be called corporatism. We have had many people say that the United States is descending into fascism. It's already a fascist state. Donald Trump being included, one of the people who's labeled the United States as such. Should people be concerned about, this not being prosecuted and the future administrations we could have? We might, hear some future plans from Donald Trump or Joe Biden about what the Justice Department will look like going forward in terms of handling corporate power in the United States. What would you tell people on that front who are very nervous of the merging together of states and corporations, especially here at home?
Yeah, I mean, look at rent affordability right now. That's like one of the largest issues facing America, and like the merging of the corporate world and government is, you have these corporations just buying up homes across the country. So I would say, yeah, you should be concerned to a certain degree about the government and the corporate world merging together. That's resulted in higher healthcare prices as well. But yeah, as far as the DOJ bringing charges against Boeing, it'll be really interesting to see how they go after this company that has a decades long relationship with the government. And how this will affect their relationship going forward. And, I just, like I mentioned earlier, why is it that the government or federal prosecutors want to pack on charges and throw the book at the average citizen to get like a plea bargain? But when it comes to these corporations, they tend to, offer sweetheart deals or, every which way to not have a guilty plea on their record.
Yeah, we did see, the FBI raid a corporate landlord. That's a really good example. I guess no one in the administration was a former consultant for Realtek or Cortland Management, but I hope we see work like that continue.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate you having me on.
CNN is likely to draw at least 70 million eyeballs to tonight's debate. That is compared to a normal primetime showing of tens of thousands. Now, it's no longer news that mainstream media is in a downward spiral. Business headwinds are fierce, so much so that they have potential to destroy what's been considered legacy institutions in decades past, from NPR, The Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, ABC News, and on and on and on. Now, CNN hired Mark Thompson, the man credited with turning around the New York Times. He's trying to figure out how to save the brand that Ted Turner launched in the 1980s. Was at the time itself revolutionary and a disruptor. Now it's decaying, facing accusation that it's old and out of touch. CNN has been also accused of bias and reflexively siding with Democrats over supporters of Donald Trump. Here to discuss what is at stake for CNN is media professor Jeff McCall from Depauw University. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
So the focus on CNN itself has become a very important topic for conservatives. Trump supporters are as likely to rail against the media as the Democrats. In fact, they see very little difference between the two entities. What is at stake for CNN in this debate, given the just awful climate for media institutions, mainstream institutions, conservative institutions as well? It's a bad time for business. How is CNN looking at this with a potential eye toward reviving its failing business?
Well, you're exactly right. CNN has had a very tough go of it in recent years. I mean, that goes across the media landscape, but CNN in particular has been suffering in recent years. I mean, their ratings have really tanked. Their prestige has really dropped. And I think having the opportunity to host this primetime debate is a great opportunity for CNN. Because frankly, I'm not sure they deserved it necessarily. Their ratings wouldn't suggest that. And there are a lot of indications that CNN has leaned left. That's not just me saying that. There are rating services that verify that. The audience has basically verified that by not tuning into CNN. But the rating service All Sides Media has CNN listed as leaning left. So, I mean, I think they've had a hard go of it in trying to track the kind of broad mainstream audience across demographics that CNN used to attract, because they don't do that anymore. And for several years, they worked very hard to kind of go left with their primetime hosts like Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo and Jake Acosta, or Jim Acosta, I should say, was quite an antagonist during the Trump administration. So CNN worked very hard to kind of earn their left-leaning stripes, but then it kind of backfired on them, and they lost a lot of ratings power. So they have a great opportunity now because they've got a chance in front of millions of viewers who haven't even thought about CNN for several years. They've got a chance to reestablish themselves and to maybe demonstrate that they can operate a professional journalistic political debate and make it fair and professional and try to attract some people back to a CNN brand that many people like me remember years ago as being a fair and well-rounded news organization that was trying to do a journalistic service to the nation, but I don't think they still have that image right now.
In your piece, your op-ed with The Hill, you wrote about how CNN's viewership has declined significantly over the last year, about 27% at any given point during prime time, having just 500,000 viewers or less. And you see this moment when a lot of people are talking about, is this a make or break moment for Biden, for Trump? It seems that you see this as a make or break moment for CNN. Can you speak more to how you think this could potentially launch CNN's success following the debate, or what a bad performance would look like to keep CNN, as you called it, a bottom feeder in the journalistic world?
Yeah, well, it's interesting to think that CNN's ratings have declined in the last year, because in the last year, with political temperatures going up and a campaign getting geared up and that sort of thing, you would have thought their ratings might have taken a little bit of bump. But they've got an opportunity to prove themselves tonight. And I think what they have to do to prove themselves is that they have to make sure that the moderators, Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, handle themselves professionally, and they do not come off as activists or antagonists for either of the candidates. I think they need to put themselves in a position where they are trying to generate a public dialogue between the two people who will likely be president, one or the other, come November, and to try to get them to engage in issues and to not take off on these tangents where they might try to play gotcha. And my real fear, frankly, is that the moderators, Bash and Tapper, will try to create dueling press conferences where they have a series of questions that are designed only for Biden or only for Trump, and not allow them to talk about things that they should both be interested in talking about, whether that would be the economy or international diplomacy or reuniting the country in a polarizing time. Those are the things they should all talk about. But if the panelists get distracted and they ask Biden a question like, oh, why did your Afghanistan withdrawal go so terribly? You know, that's not necessarily a question that Trump even can talk about, because he wasn't around at that time in charge of the military. Or if they want to start asking Trump about, like, why are you a convicted felon? Well, that just plays into Biden's hands and creates the impression that these are journalists who are not interested in moderating a debate, but rather in being activists and trying to play a role as pseudo-debaters in the event tonight. And so I really think that CNN can be successful if their moderators can moderate, be traffic cops, but not be activists or antagonists, because they really need to be referees in a sense like this. And I think that if they look like they're playing favorites, they're going to play into the hands or the impressions of all the people who are out there saying CNN's biased, they shouldn't have had the opportunity to host this debate in the first place.
Yeah, I absolutely hear that point about it really being, I think that's the fear, being two debates. One, Dana Bash and Jake Tapper versus Donald Trump, and Dana Bash and Jake Tapper versus Joe Biden. And I know a lot of conservatives think it'll be more, vicious with Trump than with Biden. But really, the formatting, this whole microphone situation, that they're going to just be automatically muted, the two candidates, when their time is up. You know, I understand the desire to prevent them from talking over each other and interrupting each other. Wallace really struggled with that in one of the debates in the last cycle. So I get that. At the same time, if they're utterly prevented from sort of having cross chatter, then it starts to be not a debate at all, and exactly what you said, two just different press conferences with some intense questioning. So what are your thoughts about how this different format, no audience, much less interaction, an ability to prevent interaction entirely between the two candidates, does that start to be no longer a debate at all?
I think you raise a very interesting point here, that at a certain point it's not a debate. And the fact that they're going to be muting microphones, I think that was, a sign of desperation, frankly. And I'm not sure exactly who decided to do that. My guess is the White House, which handpicked CNN, of course, to host this debate. My guess is the White House was interested in making sure that Trump wouldn't be too antagonistic or interrupting all the time, because we look at the debates from 4 years ago, and they were not great moments in American political rhetoric, let me just say that. And Trump, of course, was very aggressive. But keep in mind, Biden was aggressive at the time, too, and, called Trump a clown and told him to shut up and that sort of thing. So, I mean, neither candidates came off very well 4 years ago. And so I think these rules this time are designed to try to force some civility into the discussion, which I can kind of understand on one level. But on the other hand, it reduces any opportunity for them to interact or to ask questions of each other. And I don't expect Lincoln Douglas style debating here between these two candidates, because frankly, I don't think either one are necessarily great public rhetoricians, but I do think they should at least have some opportunity to interact. And that's going to be a trick for the moderators to be able to say, how can we get these people to address each other and differentiate themselves when we've got dueling press conferences going on?
Professor McCall, I really appreciate your description of potentially Dana Bash and Jake Tapper tonight being pseudo-debaters versus moderators. I think that's really helpful so people know what to look for. Which category are they falling into? They've been attacked on social media a lot recently for their prior statements and having a political bias in their reporting. People online seemingly predict that they will be more so pseudo-debaters, and they're concerned about how that will affect the bias of the entire event tonight. I'm curious if you think all of that ramping up of that fervor and personal attacks, in some cases against Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, if that's going to put them in the mindset to be pseudo-debaters rather than moderators tonight, or do you predict they'll be measured in their role?
I'm hoping that they'll be measured, but all of the criticism online and in social media puts them on their heels right from the get-go. And so they're kind of on notice that they've got to go in to try to be fair. My fear is that their kind of instincts of being journalists and interrogators will get in the way of their efforts to be moderators. And keep in mind here that journalists, when they're doing journalistic interviews, need to probe, and they need to question, and they need to fact check and that sort of thing. But we don't need moderators at a political debate to do that in the same way that they would if this were a one-on-one kind of State of the Union address, or State of the Union interview. That's the CNN show that they have on Weekend that's hosted by Tapper and Bash. They don't need to do that. And the reason they don't need to be aggressive and fact checkers and probing is because the candidates are right there to challenge each other. So presumably if Trump said something that was off the wall or couldn't be verified, Biden is right there to challenge him. In the same way, the other way around, if Biden says something that can't be verified or is an exaggeration, Trump should be allowed right there to challenge that assertion. And that's why the muted mics become a problem, because you reduce interactivity, and then it's the candidates who should be challenging each other rhetorically and holding each other's feet to the fire rather than the moderators. And if the moderators jump in and start trying to say, oh, well, Mr. Trump, you made a statement that can't be verified, it makes it look like they're taking sides. In the same way, if they were to do that with Biden, although I think most of the betting money on the internet is that Tapper and Bash would be more aggressive toward Trump just based on their previous statements. And as you know, there are montages all over the internet of the two of them saying really negative things about Trump and not so much necessarily about Biden.
Yes, indeed. Professor McCall, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
The Supreme Court has just rejected a controversial settlement with OxyContin maker Purdue Pharma. For context, Purdue Pharma made its fortune on aggressive and allegedly unethical marketing of OxyContin. It has long been cited as a catalyst of the nationwide opioid epidemic that has claimed the lives of thousands of Americans. The settlement would have shielded members of the Sackler family, who owned Purdue Pharma, from civil lawsuits over the impact of opioids. But at the same time, under the agreement, the Sacklers would have given up the company and would have given billions to combat the opioid epidemic. The settlement also provided that Purdue Pharma would emerge from bankruptcy as a different entity, with its profits being used for prevention and treatment purposes.
In the 5-4 vote, Justice Gorsuch wrote for the majority, found that, quote, the Sacklers seek greater relief than a bankruptcy discharge normally affords, for they hope to extinguish even claims for wrongful death and fraud, and nothing in present law authorizes the Sackler discharge. Justices Kavanaugh, Jackson, Kagan, and Sotomayor dissented. Kavanaugh wrote, quote, opioid victims are now deprived of the substantial monetary recovery that they long fought for and finally secured after years of litigation, and opioid victims and other future victims of mass torts will suffer greatly in the wake of today's unfortunate and destabilizing decision. The Biden administration has argued that if the court were to stop the agreement, further negotiations could lead to a better deal for victims. So it was Gorsuch, Thomas, Alito, Barrett, Jackson. I have to double check if I read that right. I'm not sure that I did. In the majority, with Kavanaugh, Roberts, Sotomayor, and Kagan in the minority. So the 3 liberal justices were split. It was 2 liberals in the minority with 2 of the conservatives, and then Jackson, the other liberal, in the majority with the rest of the conservatives. So this is an ideologically mixed case. It's a little bit confusing, but basically the situation is that the majority said this deal, while giving, billions to victims to help with rehabilitation of opioids and dealing with this structured bankruptcy of Purdue Pharma, the majority said this deal is still too favorable to the Sackler family because it will stop future people from bringing claims against the Sacklers due to wrongful death from opioids. So they said it was too good, the deal, and that was not fair to other people who might want to pursue legal action against the Sacklers. So it is thrown out for that reason. So there are some people who were going to get a lot of money under the current deal who are victims of the Sacklers and of Purdue Pharma. We're very upset about it. There are others who say, well, no, they should have to pay even more, and maybe other people who want to bring future claims. So those people are happy about it. So it's kind of a mixed decision all over the place. You can see it as some are saying, well, without this decision in place, we're effectively depriving, tons of people from settlement money that they were going to get as a result of this decision. Others saying, but that was still going to be too favorable to the Sacklers, so we got to try to get a better deal, or one that holds them accountable for this horrible opioid epidemic that has claimed the lives of thousands of Americans.
Right. It's one of those Supreme Court cases where there's not a homogenous reason for being in the majority or the dissent. It seems that some of the justices are of the belief that perhaps, the corporation itself should be responsible rather than the family, that it's too harsh on the Sacklers, and some believe it's not harsh enough. Let's not forget that this came out of a sweetheart deal from the George W. Bush administration. In 2007, prosecutors recommended felony charges against the executives of Purdue Pharma, and this was the result of George W. Bush not wanting to pursue that kind of legal action and instead doing this settlement. So while, yes, it would allow people to additionally sue for Purdue Pharma's ramifications of getting them addicted to OxyContin, wrongful death suits, and things of the like. But also what this deal did was protect them from criminal prosecution, which is significant if you consider the fact that George W. Bush has received donations from the Sackler family, that Big Pharma funded his very glitzy inauguration to the tune of $1.7 million. $1 million. And so thinking about this close connection of the George W. Bush administration and Big Pharma, it feels like classic legal but questionable American corruption. And I'll also say that it shouldn't be taken lightly that they were ready to pursue criminal charges. They found emails in exchange of executives at Purdue Pharma, including with the Sackler family, who were very involved and were the owners of the company at the time, where they knew how addictive OxyContin is, and they knew its street value. They were talking about how it can be marked up 259%, and that there would be such a demand for it because people were addicted to the drug and using it on the streets, not for its intended medical purpose.
Yeah, it's a fascinating outcome that does in fact clear the way to doing that if there's a bold enough system to prosecute, to actually bring criminal charges for what has gone wrong in America, for all of the deaths of despair and devastation that has been wrought by opioid addiction, the drug being the way it was marketed. Many people say lend itself toward easy addiction, that it was not clear to people exactly how addictive it is. And the Sacklers haven't had any involvement in Purdue Pharma since 2020. They've tried to get out of it, avoid the spotlight, and they were going to give several billions for rehabilitation under the deal, but they were not going to be prosecuted as a result. So, very interesting decision.
Right. I don't know if it's satisfactory for a lot of the families that have been affected by the opioid crisis, with over 200,000 people losing their lives in the past 2 decades credited to the opioid crisis in the United States. And for a company and their executives to willingly market this to anyone who will buy it because they can enrich themselves, knowing the damage that it would cause, it is something that in my heart of hearts I believe is wrong criminally. And I don't think $8 billion is sufficient to repair what's happened. And so it's a difficult decision for the Supreme Court to make, because now, will we get the $6 billion
right now, you might
or
get
more,
nothing.
Or will we get nothing? Will we get less?
That's what I'm seeing. This decision obviously is just breaking. We're familiarizing ourselves with it. I'm reading the reaction on social media, and there's a lot of that sentiment. I see a lot of people celebrating that this deal got thrown out, because now there is an opportunity to have proper accountability. At the same time, now there could be no accountability, and people who had been harmed or claimed they'd been harmed by Purdue Pharma were going to get payments, were going to get money as a result of this deal, and right now they're not going to get anything. Now maybe they'll get even more, maybe more people will get compensated, or nothing could happen. So I can see why people are a bit torn on whether this is a good outcome or not, but I can also see why it's a little bit like the Hunter Biden plea deal. The judge says, well, this actually shields you from the future prosecutors going after the thing people really care about, the influence peddling, the really serious potential criminal allegations. Not saying they've been proven or that there's anything necessarily to them, but it was going to be him being held, pleading guilty on some relatively trivial stuff, with the more serious stuff put away, and the judge found that unsatisfying. So there's kind of echoes of that here.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting ruling, and I think there's enough energy around the opioid crisis that those who are disappointed by it, I think we're going to see more come out of this. J.D. Vance, who's had close proximity to Donald Trump, is floated as potentially a VP pick. This is an issue that he's made center to his political persona. And so I'm very curious to see if we see more of the same of Republican administrations being very friendly to pharmaceutical companies, or if Trump and potentially J.D. Vance as well are going to sort of crack down on this thing. If we're going to see the Justice Department under Biden decide to pursue legal action in a similar fashion to how prosecutors in the DOJ under the W. Bush administration recommended further legal action in criminal prosecution, I'm sure the Biden administration's DOJ is going to be busy reviewing documents and reviewing the evidence and considering bringing forth criminal charges again.
Well, we'll see if either of them get asked about this at the debate tonight.
That would be very interesting.
Good question of how they plan to obtain accountability from this company that created so much harm nationwide. That would be a good thing to ask both candidates, whether they plan to pursue those charges now that that option is available to the U.S. government. More rising right after this. CNN's debate between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump is not the only one taking place today. Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who was barred from CNN's debate, announced this week he will be answering questions tonight in his own debate.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. here. Over 70% of Americans want a different choice than Presidents Biden or Trump. They're tired of voting for the lesser of two evils. Presidents Trump and Biden colluded with CNN to block me from representing your voices, but I'm not going to let them silence us. Go to therealdebate.com to watch me answer the same debate questions live. I'm going to be on that debate stage with or without their permission.
Many on X are rejoicing over this news. One user writing, "The reason why I think this is going to work so well for Kennedy is that it is fun and new. 10 years from now, you will distinctly remember the details of yet another Biden and Trump argument? Of course not. We already have seen that same petty fight again and again, but will you remember tuning in to the, quote, protest debate hosted by a candidate who was unfairly excluded? Obviously, yes, this will be a night to remember. I'm going to throw a debate party for family and friends. I'll turn on the Kennedy Dr. Phil interview at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and then we'll all watch the Kennedy debate together at 9. It's unclear whether Kennedy will be answering his own questions or responding to Trump and Biden's back and forth, but his debate will be broadcast live on X at the very same time of the CNN throwdown. I'm very curious to see that as well. I don't think he'll be reacting. I think he's going to be giving us an alternative to what we're seeing on CNN. I think that's his vibe, right?
Yeah, I think it sounds to me like, I'm not quite sure what the format is, he's going to be trying to answer the same questions that's being posed to them while it's going on, which is great. You know, I think it's an absolute scandal, however, that he is just not in the debate itself. We can blame CNN a little bit for allowing that to happen, but of course, you know, they were trying to get Trump and Biden, and really it's on Trump and Biden, who were dead set against having a debate with only each other, who both of them agreed that there should be no RFK Jr. in the debate. They just want it to be between the two of them. I think it's, you know, at a time where so much is being said about the threat to democracy in this country, those criticisms ring utterly hollow from frankly, the Biden camp, if they're unwilling to include part of the democratic process has been for decades, has been debates between the major presidential candidates, not just the top two. Perot was in the debate when he was polling well in the Clinton-Bush election. RFK Jr. doesn't have quite those poll numbers, but he's not at like the third party 1% nothing numbers either. He has gained the support of a significant number of Americans. I mean, I think Gary Johnson, the Libertarian Party candidate, should have been in the national debates in 2016 when he had numbers that were approaching the threshold at which the debate commission's rules would have kicked in, saying he ought to be in there. Now they don't have to go by any rules because they rejected the debate commission. They're just doing whatever the hell they want. They should have included RFK Jr. It is a moral scandal that he's not on that debate stage.
Right. It seems that RFK Jr. appreciates democracy, is willing to be an example of popular democracy and allowing independent voices to thrive through the electoral process. The Biden camp also likes democracy, but maybe a little bit less than that. I think they would like to have the uniparty control what candidates we have to pick from, but we still get to pick. And Trump, after the interview with Tom Jones yesterday, I'm not so sure everyone supporting Donald Trump is very pro-democracy at all, but we will see what that looks like in the debate tonight. Very curious.
Firing federal employees is an affront to democracy. In my view, it's not. In my view, when the president, whoever comes in, they're going to do that, and that's just fine.
They can't fire them, Robby. It's just a list. They're just putting out a list of 100 names to intimidate them so that they quit.
Well, the liberal administrative state has tried to stop Trump from even being on the ballot in several states. So who's defending democracy here? They don't want you. They're trying to put him in prison. They don't want you to be able to vote for him. They say democracy is at stake, but we're doing everything we can to stop you from voting for Donald Trump. They're also doing everything they can, by the way, behind the scenes to make it more difficult for RFK Jr. to be on the ballot in various places. There's been mainstream reporting on like the war room that's been set up to deal with RFK Jr. when they, I think, were more concerned that he was significantly going to be taking away Democratic votes. Now we know there's less evidence of that RFK Jr. is specifically taking away from Biden. He seems to be taking from both camps in somewhat equal measure, also probably attracting voters who are just not going to vote for Biden or Trump in any way, shape, or form. So maybe there's less worry about him, but I think they would be. I think both camps really would have been worried about him on the debate stage because now, while he is a somewhat older man himself, he is in much more robust including with his difficulty speaking that he's talked very publicly about his voice issue. He is still a younger and more charismatic and more collected speaker. I mean, I think even if you don't agree with him, and it's sort of an objective statement at this point, than either Trump or Biden. Again, that's not to say that I agree with his policies more, or I think he's more right or something, but he has a more compelling and energetic performance than our very senior team of mainstream candidates.
Yes, he can put more interesting words together in a better order and maybe faster. I do think the Democrats...
Underrated skills in a debate.
Right. Apparently. I think, the Biden camp, the establishment Democrats that are talking about democracy being in peril, it's like, well, we need to take Trump off the ballot. So we have a little bit less democracy now so we can have more later. Because if he gets into office, he's going to get rid of it. But I think
it's the experiment. Do you want one cookie now or 2 cookies later?
I think that's the case they're making to the American
people.
They
want more democracy.
Yeah, I think they're worried that he has a really strong shot at winning the Electoral College and not the popular vote. And I don't think there's enough movement around getting rid of the Electoral College, or if the Supreme Court would uphold that kind of legislation if it were to ever be passed. And so I think the Democrats are a little bit desperate right now because they're not willing to make the case in the way that RFK Jr. is about corporate power in the country. I'm interested to see what RFK Jr. is going to say about this recent ruling. He has ads running on X right now promoting the debate.
Purdue Pharma one, yeah.
Yes, the Purdue Pharma Supreme Court ruling. We covered it on the show. If you're not up to snuff on it, basically Purdue Pharma did some bad stuff and the Supreme Court made a decision on it. This is something RFK Jr. had paid attention to for quite some time. And the American Values PAC was formerly like the American Pharma something PAC, Accountability PAC. It was the People's Pharma movement, very focused on getting accountability to what RFK Jr. calls a criminal enterprise. So I'm very interested to see what RFK Jr. is willing to talk about that Trump and Biden won't even touch in their answers to the same questions.
Yeah, I would love to hear him talk about that. I suspect he will. I suspect we're more likely to hear from him what kind of accountability measures he would implement to deal with the opioid crisis. I think we're way more likely to hear that from RFK Jr. than we are from Trump or Biden. But of course, they could always prove us wrong.
They could always prove us wrong. It's happened before, but I think they're both going to be playing it safe tonight because they know RFK Jr. is not on the same debate stage, and they love painting him as this guy that's very fringe, and I just don't think people are buying it. I think him not being on the debate stage and the way the campaign has postured themselves as this outcast is making Trump posturing himself like an outcast while on this debate covered by CNN with 70 million viewers. He kind of looks like the establishment party pick right now with this RFK Jr. narrative out there, which is very interesting for the many populist voters in the country that are sympathetic to that.
My fear is that it's just going to be 2 debates with the CNN moderators just asking Biden questions that he can't even really answer about his age. Like, because they'll say, this many Americans, even Democrats, think you're too old for this job. Are you too old for this job? And he'll be like, come on, man, I'm in really good shape. That's going to be the Biden stuff, which is like, I mean, that is certainly a fair question because people do have a lot of concerns about his age, but there isn't really any way that he can address that. I mean, he is old. There's nothing he can do about that. And then on the other side, I'm worried then it's going to be that for Biden, and then for Trump, it's just going to be all questions about January 6th or election stuff and like nothing else, because that is the issue that most animates the mainstream media that guides so much of their coverage, which I think it's fair to ask him some of, but there are so many other questions about the economy, about immigration, about foreign policy. I really hope foreign policy comes up. You probably do as well. With Israel, Gaza, we know obviously what Biden thinks about it because he's in charge of the policy. I'm really curious if Trump has criticisms of that, if he would support Israel even more vigorously, more vehemently, as many Republicans do and want him to do, or if he might, every now and then he has a kind of maverick streak on foreign policy where he says we're overly involved in other places in the world. There's currently no love lost between him and Netanyahu. He might say something totally different. So I really hope he gets a question on that.
I would really like for Biden to hold Trump to a concrete position on Israel, Gaza, not just say, I would handle it better than you're handling it, but really say, what would you do differently and be precise about it? Trump is so flippant. He gives himself the room to make an entirely different decision once he's in public office than potentially his stance today by just being non-committal. And I think I have a big question around whether or not Biden can last this long talking to many people. We've seen Trump give very long speeches. There's questions about both of their age and mental fortitude at this point in time. But I think my question is, what will Biden look like throughout the duration of the debate? It's the longest we've seen him speak in a public setting in 4 years?
It's hard to talk that long. I actually participated in a very intense debate for Zero Hedge last night on immigration that was moderated by Emily Jashinsky and Ryan Grimm, who used to be in the Rising Universe hosting some things here. And I didn't realize it was going to go for 2 hours. And by like the hour and a half mark, I got some gotcha question. I was just like, I don't care. Ask the other person. Like it's an exhausting thing to do a really knockdown, drag out debate for a long time, even with when you're feeling very energetic. I mean, I guess this was like my 6th hour of talking during the day because I do our show and I did some other stuff and then I did this. But so it's no easy task, and Biden has not exactly shown that he can easily talk in front of a crowd anymore when he gets remotely hostile questions without a teleprompter. Right. When he gets remotely hostile questions from reporters at press conferences, he's really seemed to struggle. Well, we will have some debate coverage tomorrow, obviously, with Amber Duke will be here for their usual session. I'm going to come in as well. We're also going to be making some content during the debate tonight, so look for that on YouTube. We're going to be reacting to the debate tomorrow with some interesting alternative candidates, including the Libertarian Party's Chase Oliver, and we expect to have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. himself. So you will not want to miss any of that coverage. We're looking forward to it. We'll see you tomorrow, later tonight and tomorrow.
And be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content, our debate coverage tonight and tomorrow. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available wherever you get your podcasts.
See you soon.
Bye.